First college football playoff rankings coming out this evening. We talked to the Ohio State Buckeyes before those rankings come out. We're taping this before those rankings come out as Jeremy Birmingham from LebanonRoad.com joins us now. And certainly we got the same message from both Ryan Day as we got from Justin Fields in regards to those rankings. They don't matter to the Buckeyes right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's both honest but also political speak, because it doesn't matter. We know Ohio State, whenever this airs tonight, so 8 o'clock, I mean, it's going to air in Toledo at 10 o'clock. We're 2 hours outside of the TV show on ESPN. The Buckeyes are going to be in the top 4. It doesn't really matter where they are right now, as long as they win and take care of their business. As Justin Fields said as he was walking out of the team meeting room, if they go undefeated, they're in. And that's all that's really on the mind of the Buckeyes. They know what's in front of them. They understand that they have to put an answer out there, but you know, it doesn't matter as long as they're in that top 4 right now, and they are.
And for the first time since 2015, when it comes to the college football playoff rankings, the Buckeyes do control their own destiny this year.
Right. I mean, this is about a team that has everything in front of them. They know exactly what is at stake every single week. They know coming into Maryland that they can't let up. They know going into Rutgers they can't let up. Then they know that they're going to have 3 straight top 15 opponents in the Big Ten to put themselves in the playoff. Win out, they deserve to be in the playoff. They will be in the playoff if they win out. And I think they already pretty much have a good idea of where they're going to end up playing in the playoff. So if you're a Buckeyes fan and you're looking ahead, start making some plans to go to Phoenix in December, because if the Buckeyes take care of business, whether they're the 1 seed or the 2 or the 3 or the 4, they're probably going to end up in Phoenix.
Yeah, December 28th is the date for the semifinals this year. The 2 semifinal sites are Atlanta and Glendale, and it certainly would make a lot of sense for Ohio State not to go to Atlanta, because unless they're the number 1 seed, the most advantageous place for them will be Arizona, assuming that they're going to be facing either an SEC team or a Clemson team.
Yeah.
You don't think they're going to want to necessarily be in Atlanta going up against either one of those teams.
I think even if they are the number 1 seed, Phoenix is the most advantageous, because the likelihood is 3 of the 4 teams in the playoff are going to be from the Southeast. So either way, I think Ohio State is going to end up out west in Phoenix, or the Big Ten representative is going to end up out west in Phoenix. So start maybe looking at your calendar if you're a Big Ten football fan.
And if we haven't learned anything over the last 20 years, it's that Phoenix loves the Buckeyes. Ohio State's always had a very good following when they've played out in Glendale, when they played in Tempe, whenever they've been played out in the Fiesta Bowl or any permutation.
Yeah, as somebody who lived in Phoenix for 10 years, who lived only a stone's throw away from Buckeye, Arizona, I think that it's pretty appropriate that there's a town named Buckeye out there. They love Ohio State out there. Ohio State loves going out there. Obviously the best part of the country to be in the middle of December. So please, Ohio State, just take care of business so we can go out to Phoenix in December.
Part of Ryan Day's message is exactly that. Take care of business. The next game's the most important game, because if you lose to Maryland, you're not going to be in the top 4 when the end of the season comes. Let's talk a little about this Maryland matchup. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion about what happened a year ago at Maryland when Ohio State needed a 2-point conversion stop in order to force that victory, as the Terrapins in overtime, if they had converted that 2-point conversion, they would have beaten Ohio State. A lot of points scored in that game, but this is a much different defense. Even though the personnel hasn't changed, schematically they have changed, attitudinally they have changed.
Attitudinally, correct. I mean, I think that this is a team that understands full well what happened a year ago, and in a way I think it actually is advantageous for Ohio State, because these are the same players, and there is not a chance that these guys are going to go into this game against Maryland as a 44-point favorite according to Vegas and let up. They're not going to go into this game because they remember what Anthony McFarland did to them a year ago, running for 300 yards. They remember that they were within an eyelash of losing that game. I mean, the receiver was open. I mean, let's go back and watch it. It was not a dominant performance by Ohio State defensively, and I think that as much as I'd like to avoid the term revenge tour for this Ohio State defense, these guys remember, and I do believe that with that they have an opportunity to go out and slay some ghosts on Saturday.
Let's talk about Anthony McFarland. He had that monster game a year ago. He's not been the same back, particularly because he hasn't been completely healthy. Now, they said last week against Michigan that's as close as he's been healthy in a long time, but he hasn't been that same back. But even without Anthony McFarland, there's a lot of skill players on this Maryland team that are very dangerous. But the weakness on this Terrapins team right now is an offensive line that, if you're Chase Young and company, you're going to look at this going, this is a good matchup for us.
Yeah, right now they don't have a quarterback named for Saturday. They're still back and forth between Josh Jackson and Terrell Pigram. Obviously, McFarland's health has been an issue. That offensive line is patchwork and not good. But don't think that Maryland doesn't have talent. This is a program that has a lot of players who have come back home, including Ohio State cast-off Keandre Jones, Clemson linebacker Shaquille Smith. I mean, there's a lot of guys who have decided to go back home and play for Mike Locksley, a guy that is well-respected in that area. So there's a lot of big-time Division I talent on that Maryland team from one of the country's most talent-rich areas. And it's different, obviously, when you're playing against a team like Ohio State, but Maryland is the team that scored 80 points in the first 2 games of the season. Unbelievably.
Not 80 points combined.
Right.
They had 76 against Howard and a lot of points against Syracuse.
Unbelievably. They have scored fewer points since then than they did in the first 2 games total. So it's a weird thing going on right now. But again, for Ohio State, I think it's actually good that Maryland is walking into town as opposed to someone like Illinois because of what happened a year ago.
Well, let's not discredit the Fighting Illini. Since the narrow loss to Michigan, Fighting Illini has won 3 in a row. Fighting Illini and Lovie Smith are doing some good things right now, but that's not a concern for Ohio State. They will not see Illinois come December in Indianapolis. It's going to be most likely Minnesota or Wisconsin. That's not for a discussion for today either. But let's get back to this Maryland matchup. One of the interesting things, Chase Young, he's from the Maryland area. He's from Maryland, and he's going to go up against not 1, not 2, but several high school teammates of his are on this Terrapin team.
And a former coach from DeMatha High School in Maryland. It's one of the biggest, most talent-producing schools in the country, definitely in the DMV. And when Mike Locksley decided to come back to Maryland, he went and made sure that Elijah Brooks, who is the running backs coach now at Maryland and was Chase Young's high school football coach. So there's a lot of ties. But, he's not going home. They're coming to Columbus, and that's a totally different vibe as opposed to what the Buckeyes walked into on a sleepy Saturday afternoon last year.
Now, the last time Ohio State played against Wisconsin, we had the weather factor with the rain. This week, it's supposed to be dry, but it's also supposed to be very cold. So we're starting to get the questions about Justin Fields playing in a cold weather game, and he always goes back to, well, in high school I played in some cold games in Georgia, and you certainly do get that in Georgia. I don't know if that weather is going to be a factor, but it's certainly going to be something that's in the minds of some at this point.
If you've ever spent time on a football field in a stadium like Ohio State, even when it's 40 degrees or colder, if the sun is out, it kind of is a little warm as long as there's no wind. So I don't think that's going to be an issue come Saturday for Ohio State. The high temperature, I think, is supposed to be 40 degrees on Saturday, but I think that's supposed to be at like midnight on Saturday night. So it's definitely going to be chilly, but I don't think that that's something that should concern Ohio State as far as Justin Fields' ability to handle things. If anything, with the Ohio State offensive line playing as well as they're playing, with the run game for the Buckeyes being as strong, as dominant as it's been, I think it just sets up things even worse for Maryland, who's going to be forced to rely more on their offensive line, which, as we already mentioned, is not playing particularly well. Another
thing we learned this week is Ryan Day's happy place. After a noon victory, crank up the radio, drive up 315 North home, sit on the couch, watch some football, order in some food, enjoy the time with family. And this Saturday, assuming they get the victory over Maryland, I think the game he's going to be watching the most will be not LSU Alabama. I think he's going to be watching that Penn State Minnesota game.
Yeah, honestly, Ryan Day's idea of a happy Saturday sounds a lot like mine. He gets to home probably a few hours earlier, as I got to drive all the way to Toledo, but throw in a couple beers, and that's pretty much my perfect Saturday night as well. So unlike last Saturday, where there was not much to watch as far as the college football world goes, this Saturday has some big ones. Obviously, Alabama, LSU, but no doubt that Minnesota and Penn State game in the Big Ten has a lot of implications for what happens moving down the line.
Let's look ahead a little bit as well. Rutgers is the next opponent after Maryland. Now, tomorrow, Wednesday, that'd be November the 7th, I believe, if I'm doing the math right in my head. That is the actual 150th anniversary of the first recognized college football game in which Rutgers played in that game. Expect an announcement from Rutgers on Wednesday, perhaps even bringing back Greg Schiano as their next head coach. And I wouldn't be shocked if they do make that announcement on Wednesday, if next Saturday when they host Ohio State, we see Greg Schiano at halftime of that game.
Yeah, I think that's almost has to be their plan. If they want to find some way to fire up that fan base, that's the way to do it. You bring Schiano back, you let him come out and do a speech or something at halftime while Rutgers is getting decimated, and hopefully put some interest back in that program. But I agree, from what I've heard from people that know these things, that deal is pretty much done between Greg Schiano and Rutgers, and hopefully it's something that can help lift up the Big Ten moving forward.
Now, we did have a change of coach at Florida State, which means there's now some questions about their recruits, their commits. This is the time of the year, November, December, where the guys you've got verbals from, you got to lock down, and you got to start sniffing around guys who maybe aren't necessarily as locked down with their schools. Where does Ohio State stand, particularly at the running back position?
I don't think that right now, and I know there's some conflicting interest out there, but Jalen Knighton, who is the primary guy at Florida State's recruiting class, he was the second-ranked player in their class, decommitted from the Seminoles on Monday afternoon. He's a player that we've talked about a number of times that actually committed privately to Ohio State back in June, and there's some debate about whether or not the Buckeyes are going to go after him. There is never a time when the Buckeyes are going to simply shut down communication with a player or a high school coach because they have to keep doors open from a political point of view. But I don't see any scenario where they would welcome Jalen Knighton back into this class, despite the fact that they need a running back. I think they've moved on, and they, from what I've heard from people who know these things, they're comfortable in doing so. So, Florida State's recruiting class, which was 16th in the country when they decided to let go of Willie Taggart, has already taken a number of hits, and they'll continue to take more. But it's an interesting topic, is why do you make that decision now as opposed to December? But when it comes to recruiting and it comes to college football coaching, if it's going to happen eventually, it needs to happen immediately, because recruits and their families want to make sure that there's a plan in place, and a lot of stuff that they can't be told. You can't read publicly, obviously, but they're being told privately, this is where we're going, this is who we think is going to be the coach. And a lot of times, which is actually very interesting, there's a major bump in recruiting as soon as you get a new coach. So it brings some new excitement, some new energy into the program, and Florida State is way too talented to have been as bad as they've been over the last handful of years. That's not all on Willie Taggart, but they were not getting better, and if you don't see that light at the end of the tunnel, it's time to move on.
Before we move on, let's go back to the Maryland game for a second, as the Terrapins, they put together a very good game plan against Michigan. Now, they did lose big time to the Wolverines, but that game was only 14-0 late in the second quarter, and that was after Michigan took the opening kickoff back. Statistically, Maryland did some very good things against Michigan, particularly they kept the ball away from the Wolverines, and Michigan offense didn't help out with some 3-and-outs. Is there a way for Maryland to win this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, as you said it, you just got to keep the ball away from Ohio State and hope that the Buckeyes defense, which has led to more points for Ohio State this year than they've given up. Let me rephrase that. The Buckeyes have scored more points off of turnovers this year than the defense has allowed. So it's not always the best plan, because the truth is they can still beat you that way. But you got to keep the ball away from them. You have to hope for a couple mistakes by the Buckeyes. You have to hope that Ohio State is doing what we're doing, which is looking ahead. And I don't sense that from our time here at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center today.
Yeah, we have not felt that at all from this Buckeye team all season long. They've always been focused on the next game. I want to thank Jeremy Birmingham from LettermanRow.com for joining us as the Buckeyes prepare for Saturday noon against Maryland.